pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out your mouth!
Two of Hollywood's most respected comedy legends didn't plan a collaboration, but one explosive night forced their voices to collide. After Will Smith's shocking Oscars moment stunned the world, Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy independently broke their silence, and together, their words painted a devastating picture of Hollywood's double standards. What they revealed wasn't just about a slap, it was about power, protection, and who the industry chooses to defend. Why did these two icons speak up now? And why did their comments hit harder than anyone expected? Join us as we unveil the details of the exposé. Jim Carrey's scathing critique. The 94th Academy Awards seemed destined to be Will Smith's crowning achievement. After decades of blockbuster success, he was the people's favorite to win Best Actor for his portrayal of Richard Williams in King Richard.
We got future doctors and lawyers, plus a couple tennis stars in this house. Now, I understand you got to...
The $9 billion box office titan was at the peak of his powers, beloved by audiences and respected by peers. Then Chris Rock made a joke, comparing Jada Pinkett Smith to G.I. Jane because of her shaved head, and it triggered something in Will. What happened next was captured by cameras from multiple angles and broadcast to over 15 million viewers. Will walked calmly onto the stage, slapped Rock across the face, returned to his seat.
Oh, wow! Wow!
And shouted profanities at the comedian. The audience sat in stunned silence. Some thought it was a rehearsed bit. Others couldn't believe what they were witnessing. But the most revealing moment came later when Will won Best Actor and received a standing ovation from most of the room. Hollywood had just watched one of its biggest stars commit assault on live television, and their response was applause. That standing ovation became the focal point of criticism from two men who understood Hollywood better than most, Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy. Their reactions weren't just about one incident, but about an entire system. 3 days after the Oscars and the shocking incident, Jim Carrey appeared on CBS Mornings and delivered one of the most cutting critiques to emerge from the fallout. His reaction went beyond Will Smith himself and took aim at the wider Hollywood culture that, in his view, rushed to protect one of its own. Jim said he was deeply disturbed by the standing ovation Will received, describing it as a moment that exposed an industry lacking backbone. To him, the applause signaled a collective failure and marked a turning point where Hollywood no longer deserved to see itself as the moral or cultural cool club. Jim did not stop with criticism of the standing ovation. He went further, explaining how he believed the situation should have been handled, making it clear that his perspective was rooted in principle rather than celebrity politeness. He said that if he had been in Chris Rock's position, he would have announced the very next morning that he was suing Will Smith for $200 million. He also stated that the footage would live forever, becoming unavoidable and permanently attached to Rock's image. In his view, the damage caused by that moment would linger for years. He further emphasized that while people are free to voice disapproval from their seats or on social media, no one has the right to walk onto a stage and physically strike someone simply for saying words. Jim's analysis went deeper than simple condemnation. Drawing on his own spiritual journey and understanding of fame's psychological toll, he offered a theory about what drove Will's behavior, one that touched on the existential crisis of celebrity itself. According to Jim, Will had created an avatar, a constructed identity that he had maintained for 30 years. This wasn't the real Will Smith. It was a carefully curated product designed for public consumption. The family man, the protector, and the beloved star who only did uplifting movies. When Rock made a joke about Jada, it wasn't just offensive to Will the person. It was an attack on Will the avatar, the image that required constant protection and validation. This perspective was particularly meaningful coming from Jim, who had spent years openly discussing his own spiritual awakening and disillusionment with Hollywood. In multiple interviews, Jim has explained how he came to see his own celebrity persona as an illusion, a character he played that had little to do with his true self. In a 2017 interview that went viral, Jim stated, As an actor, you play characters, and if you go deep enough into those characters, you realize your own character is pretty thin to begin with. Suddenly you have this separation and go, who's Jim Carrey? Oh yeah, he doesn't exist. Jim's criticism of Will was informed by this understanding. He saw a man trapped inside an image, unable to separate his authentic self from the persona he had created. When that persona was threatened, Will lashed out violently, not to defend his wife, but to defend the illusion he'd spent decades building. If Jim Carrey represented the philosophical critique of Hollywood's dysfunction, what did Eddie Murphy, a man who'd avoided the spotlight for decades, have to say about it all? Eddie Murphy's pointed message. Eddie Murphy hates award shows. He has said so repeatedly, calling them fake and describing the feeling of being in a room full of famous people wanting trophies as such a shitty feeling. So when Eddie Murphy accepted the Cecil B. DeMille Award at the 2023 Golden Globes, his first major awards appearance in years, people paid attention. Eddie's acceptance speech was characteristically brief and funny, but near the end, he delivered a line that made headlines around the world. "Pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out your mouth." The audience erupted in nervous laughter. Eddie smiled and continued with his speech, but backstage he clarified that the joke came from a place of love. He knew and respected all the parties involved. Yet the message was clear. What Will did was wrong, and Eddie wasn't afraid to say it on one of Hollywood's biggest stages. To understand why Eddie's comment was so significant, you have to understand his relationship with Hollywood. Unlike Will Smith, who spent decades courting industry approval, Eddie built his career on being authentically himself, sometimes to his detriment. His disdain for Hollywood's performative culture stems partly from personal experience. At the 2007 Academy Awards, Eddie was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Dreamgirls.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the Hollywood Foreign Press for honoring what I did in Dreamgirls, and thank you.
When he lost to Alan Arkin, reports claimed he stormed out in anger, cementing his reputation as a sore loser. Nearly 20 years later, Eddie finally explained what really happened that night, and his reasoning reveals everything about why he was so critical of Will's behavior. What happened was I was at the Oscars. I had lost, and then people kept coming over to me and kept patting me on the shoulder. Clint Eastwood came and rubbed my shoulder, and I was like, "Oh no, I'm not gonna be this guy all night. Let's just leave." I didn't storm out. I was like, "I'm not gonna be the sympathy guy all night," Eddie explained. Eddie refused to play the role Hollywood wanted him to play, the gracious loser who sits there and takes the consolation from his peers. He saw the performance for what it was and opted out. This is the same principle he was applying to Will. Stop performing, stop protecting your image, and face the consequences of your actions. In his Netflix documentary, Eddie reveals he believes he was effectively blacklisted by the Academy after giving a blunt speech at the 1988 Oscars questioning how black talent was being recognized. He warned Robin Williams backstage, "I'm going to say this." Williams responded, "But why go there?" Eddie said it anyway, and believes he never got an Oscar nomination for his subsequent work as a result. Eddie's willingness to sacrifice awards recognition for honesty makes his criticism of Will particularly potent. He's someone who's lived through the consequences of telling uncomfortable truths in Hollywood, and he still chose to speak up. With two comedy legends publicly criticizing both Will and Hollywood's response, how did Will Smith's career actually suffer in the months and years that followed? Career in freefall. The immediate consequences came swiftly. On April 1st, 2022, Will Smith preemptively resigned from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. A week later, the Academy banned him from attending any Academy events for 10 years. But the professional fallout was far more complex and devastating than any official punishment. Before the slap, Emancipation was positioned as Will's follow-up Oscar vehicle.
Smith appeared on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah to promote his film Emancipation, his first move since the Oscars fiasco.
Apple had paid $120 million for the Antoine Fuqua-directed drama about an enslaved man's journey to freedom. Will earned $35 million for his performance. The studio anticipated awards season buzz and prestige. Instead, the film was released quietly in December 2022 with minimal promotion. Critics were lukewarm, audiences largely ignored it, and the awards season completely shut Will out. For the first time in recent memory, a major Will Smith prestige project failed to gain any traction whatsoever. IndieWire's David Ehrlich wrote, "By virtue of its release date, subject matter, and star power alone, Emancipation was created to be seen through the same narrow lens of the system that produced it, and The Slap, an existential threat to any feature so dependent upon the Oscars for market enthusiasm, ironically did even more to yoke the movie into Hollywood's annual horse race at its own expense. The failure of Emancipation represented something more fundamental: the industry's willingness to distance itself from Will when he stopped being profitable. Hollywood measures star power through various metrics, but one of the most important is the Q score, a measurement of familiarity and appeal. Before The Slap, Will's Q score was an impeachable 39, one of the highest in the industry. By August 2022, 6 months after the incident, it had dropped to 24. By early 2024, it had fallen to just 19. A Q score measures both how well-known a celebrity is and how appealing they are to the public. Will went from being in the top tier of beloved stars to having one of the lowest Q scores among major actors. Studios use Q scores to determine which actors can open a movie and justify big budgets. Behind the scenes, the real impact was felt in development deals and project commitments. According to Variety, Netflix had just greenlit Fast and Loose 1 month before the Oscar incident. The streamer immediately put the project on pause. An anonymous studio executive told Variety in March 2023, "Everyone was waiting to see who would blink first. It isn't so much what he did, it was what he did after." That phrase, "what he did after," refers to Will's decision to stay at the ceremony, accept his Oscar, give an emotional speech without apologizing to Rock, and then dance at the Vanity Fair after party. Industry insiders felt that if Will had been immediately removed from the ceremony, the situation might have been more forgivable. Instead, his behavior suggested he felt entitled to continue celebrating despite what he'd done. As if the professional damage wasn't enough, Will's personal life became a source of public scrutiny and mockery in a way it never had before. In October 2023, Jada Pinkett Smith began promoting her memoir, Worthy, with a revelation that shocked many. She and Will had been separated since 2016. This meant that the infamous 2020 Red Table Talk episode, where Jada discussed her entanglement with August Alsina, had occurred when they weren't even together, despite the performance they put on for cameras. It also meant that when Will walked on stage to defend Jada at the Oscars, he was defending someone who hadn't been his wife in any traditional sense for 6 years. Jada Pinkett Smith told The Today Show in October 2023, "I was as confused as everybody else. It was so out of character, and I was at a loss. I didn't know what was happening, and so I just had to really ground myself and just pay attention." The public perception of Will shifted dramatically. He wasn't just the guy who slapped Chris Rock anymore, he was the guy who'd been lying about his marriage, performing for cameras, and building his entire public image on false pretenses. Every tearful moment, every Red Table Talk episode, and every family photo suddenly felt staged and manipulative. After all this damage, could Will Smith possibly make a comeback? And if so, what would it take? The attempted comeback. By early 2024, Will Smith needed a win. His career was in limbo, his reputation was shattered, and the industry was keeping him at arm's length. Enter Bad Boys Ride or Die, the fourth installment of a franchise that had been consistently successful since 1995. The timing was strategic. Bad Boys was Will's most bulletproof franchise, the one property where audiences had decades of goodwill built up. If any movie could bring Will back from exile, it was this one. Sony moved forward with a $100 million production budget and released the film on June 7, 2024. The results were complicated. Bad Boys: Ride or Die opened with $56 million domestically and $104.6 million globally. For context, 2020's Bad Boys for Life opened with $62 million domestically and went on to gross $426 million worldwide. So, Ride or Die opened slightly lower but still performed well enough to be considered a success, especially given the context of Will's tarnished reputation. The film achieved a $56 million domestic opening, $405 million worldwide total, and an A CinemaScore rating. Industry analysts pointed to several factors that helped the film succeed despite Will's damaged reputation. First, Martin Lawrence's presence provided cover. Audiences could tell themselves they were supporting both stars, not just Will. Second, the Bad Boys franchise had 30 years of goodwill built up. Third, the marketing cleverly positioned the film as escapist summer fun rather than a Will Smith comeback vehicle. Paul Dergarabedian, senior media analyst for ComScore, said, "The fact that a movie overperformed is the best possible news. This ignites the spark that the industry has been waiting for." But here's what the numbers don't tell you. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Will's agents at CAA had been calling studio executives in the weeks leading up to the release for the first time since the slap to explore possible projects. The strategy was clear. If Bad Boys: Ride or Die performed well, they wanted to announce Will's next project immediately to capitalize on the momentum. That announcement never came. Despite the film's success, no major studio rushed to sign Will for their next big project. The silence was telling. The industry was willing to let Sony take the financial risk with an established franchise. But nobody wanted to be the first to greenlight a Will Smith original or put him in a prestige project. Bad Boys: Ride or Die succeeded largely because it was a sequel in an established franchise with a built-in audience. The question Hollywood is asking isn't whether Will can still draw audiences to a franchise film. It's whether he can open an original movie as a leading man. That question remains unanswered. Interestingly, Bad Boys: Ride or Die didn't ignore the elephant in the room. According to multiple reports, the film included subtle references to Will's real-life scandal. In one scene, Mike Lowry, Will's character, faces criticism and consequences for his actions, with dialogue that seemed deliberately crafted to mirror Will's own situation. This meta-commentary was a calculated risk. By acknowledging the controversy indirectly, the filmmakers gave audiences permission to separate the character from the actor. It was essentially saying, "We know what happened. He knows what happened. Can we move forward now?" Whether audiences truly bought into this narrative remains debatable. The film's 97% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes suggests viewers were willing to forgive, or at least compartmentalize, but the relatively modest box office, compared to Bad Boys for Life, indicates that some of Will's audience had indeed walked away. So where does this leave Will Smith now? Has he truly been forgiven, or is he just on probation? What Jim and Eddie exposed. Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy's criticisms of Will Smith and Hollywood's response weren't just about one incident. They were exposing something much larger, a system that protects powerful people as long as they're profitable and discards them the moment they're not. For 3 decades, Will Smith enjoyed a level of protection that few celebrities ever experience. Stories that would have destroyed lesser careers, rumors about his sexuality, his unconventional marriage arrangement, his aggressive behavior toward co-stars were either buried or spun into positive narratives. Janet Hubert's experience on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air is instructive here. When she had a contract dispute with Will in the early 1990s, she was branded as difficult and effectively blacklisted from major roles for years. Will's team controlled the narrative, and the industry went along with it because Will was valuable. This is what Jim Carrey meant when he called Hollywood spineless. The standing ovation after the slap wasn't about supporting Will, it was about protecting the investment the industry had made in him. When someone has generated $9 billion at the box office, you don't hold them accountable. You help them manage the crisis. Both Jim and Eddie have pointed out, in different ways, the selective nature of Hollywood accountability. Lesser-known actors have been canceled for much less serious offenses, while A-listers like Will get multiple chances to redeem themselves. An unknown actor who commits assault on live television would be arrested, prosecuted, and never work in Hollywood again. Will Smith committed assault on live television, received a 10-year Academy ban, and was starring in a major summer blockbuster 2 years later. The difference? Box office value. Eddie's own experience with the industry's selective morality makes his criticism particularly pointed. He was effectively blacklisted after his 1988 Oscars speech about the lack of black recognition in major categories. He said what needed to be said, paid the price, and watched others learn the lesson. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. Will's mistake wasn't the slap itself, it was doing it so publicly that the industry couldn't pretend it didn't happen. If the same incident had occurred at a private party, it would have been handled quietly, swept under the rug, and business would have continued as usual. Jim Carrey's critique goes even deeper than industry politics. His avatar theory touches on something fundamental about fame and identity. In multiple interviews over the past decade, Jim has discussed his own journey of realizing that his celebrity persona, the wacky comedian who'd do anything for a laugh, was a prison he'd built for himself. Jim has said, "Your body needs to be depressed. It needs deep rest from the character that you've been trying to play." This perspective informed his analysis of Will. Jim saw a man who had constructed such an elaborate public persona that he'd lost touch with who he actually was: the perfect family man, the beloved star, the protector. When that persona was threatened by a simple joke, Will couldn't handle it because without the persona, he didn't know who he was. Eddie Murphy's approach is more straightforward. Stop lying, stop performing, and live authentically. His famous line at the Golden Globes, "Pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out your mouth," wasn't just a joke, it was advice. Paying your taxes means handling your responsibilities. Mind your business equals stop getting involved in drama that doesn't concern you. Keep Will Smith's wife's name out your mouth equals the obvious lesson from the Oscars incident. But there's a deeper meaning. Eddie was essentially telling Smith to live a genuine life, rather than a performed one. The reason Smith felt compelled to defend Jada was because his entire public identity was built on being her protector. If he'd been living authentically rather than performing a role, he might have handled the situation differently. How did Chris Rock react to the incident, and does he hold anything against Will Smith? The elephant in the room. Chris Rock finally spoke at length about the Oscars moment that stunned audiences worldwide, nearly a year after Will Smith walked onto the stage and slapped him during the live broadcast.
"Chris, I apologize to you. My behavior..."
While Rock initially joked about moving on just months after the incident, his Netflix stand-up special, Selective Outrage, marked the first time he fully addressed what happened and how deeply it affected him. Performing live from the Hippodrome Theater in Baltimore, Rock appeared both candid and exhausted as he pondered on the events of the night that changed public conversations about comedy, violence, and celebrity behavior. He didn't downplay the incident or soften his language. "Everybody knows what happened," he said bluntly. "I got slapped a year ago. People ask if it hurts. It still hurts. I've got Summertime ringing in my ears." Although Chris declined to press charges, and for months afterward, he avoided directly addressing the incident in detail, saying he was still processing it. It deeply affected him. While he continued touring globally, Selective Outrage became the moment where Rock finally unpacked the slap publicly. He rejected the idea that he was a victim, mocking the modern obsession with victimhood. "I'm not a victim," he insisted. "You will never see me crying on Oprah. That's not happening." Still, he acknowledged the physical and emotional impact, comparing himself to legendary boxer Manny Pacquiao for taking the hit and continuing on. Rock also dismissed any suggestion that the incident was a mutual fight. He pointed out the obvious size difference between himself and Will, noting that Will has portrayed icons like Muhammad Ali, while Rock joked that his own roles rarely involve removing his shirt. The contrast, he argued, made the idea of a fight laughable. The title, Selective Outrage itself, Rock revealed, was inspired by Will's actions. He accused Will of misdirecting his anger, suggesting that unresolved personal issues, not Rock's joke, were the real source of the outburst. Referring to Pinkett Smith's widely publicized entanglement, Rock argued that Will's public humiliation ran far deeper than the slap ever did. He claimed he even tried to reach out afterward to offer condolences, but Will Smith never returned the call. Despite his sharp jokes, Rock also expressed genuine disappointment. He admitted he had admired Will Smith for decades, from his early hip-hop days to his blockbuster film career. That admiration, Rock said, made the incident even more painful. Still, he chose restraint on Oscar night. He credited his upbringing and sense of decorum for not retaliating, ending his set with a punchline about refusing to fight on stage and dropping the microphone to roaring applause. Will Smith has since apologized multiple times, including a public Instagram post and later interviews, stating he was ashamed and out of line. He has also acknowledged that Rock may not yet be ready to talk. Rock, however, remains firm in his stance. During later stand-up appearances, including shows with Kevin Hart, he reiterated that words are not the same as violence. "Anyone who says words hurt has never been punched in the face," he joked, emphasizing that while the slap hurt, it didn't stop him. He went back to work the next day. Ultimately, selective outrage wasn't just about settling scores. It was Rock reclaiming his voice and reminding audiences why comedy that's uncomfortable and honest still matters. But while Chris Rock had chosen to live on from the sticky situation, Will Smith appears to remain stuck in the most shocking way ever. Another brewing scandal. As of January 2026, Will Smith exists in a strange limbo. He's not completely canceled. Bad Boys Ride or Die proved there's still an audience for him in the right context. But he's not back to where he was either. The $9 billion box office titan who could open any movie has been replaced by a liability that studios approach cautiously, if at all. Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy's interventions matter because they came from a place of authority and experience. These aren't jealous rivals or attention-seeking provocateurs. They're two of the most successful comedians in history, both of whom have walked away from Hollywood's machine at various points because they understood its corrupting influence. The Oscars slap changed several things fundamentally. Will Smith's carefully constructed image of perfection was destroyed in real time. No amount of PR could undo what millions of people watched happen live. The standing ovation revealed how Hollywood operates, protecting profitable stars regardless of their actions. Jim and Eddie calling this out forced a public reckoning with that reality. While audiences may have been willing to give Will another chance with Bad Boys, the muted enthusiasm and industry reluctance show that forgiveness has conditions. Will is being allowed to work, but he's not being celebrated. In previous eras, Will's team might have controlled the narrative, and now there's too much damage to control with another scandalous storm brewing. A violinist who toured with Will Smith recently filed a lawsuit against the actor-musician and a management company, alleging retaliation, sexual harassment, and wrongful termination connected to a disturbing incident that occurred while he was on tour. The lawsuit, filed Tuesday in Los Angeles County Superior Court, was brought by violinist Brian King Joseph, who claims he was abruptly fired after reporting an alleged intrusion into his hotel room.
He says once he reported the incident to Smith's team, he was fired and told he was lying about what happened.
According to the complaint, unknown items and a note addressed directly to him were left inside his room while he was away, prompting fears for his personal safety. Joseph had been hired in late 2024 to perform on Will's Based on a True Story 2025 tour, as well as at related appearances. The lawsuit states that Joseph and Will developed a close professional relationship before and during the tour, with Will allegedly making comments suggesting a unique and personal bond between them. The central incident took place in March 2025 while the tour was in Las Vegas. According to the filing, Joseph returned to his hotel room to find that someone had unlawfully entered it. Inside the room were several unfamiliar items, including wipes, a beer bottle, a backpack, a bottle of HIV medication, and hospital discharge paperwork bearing another individual's name. Also left behind was a handwritten note addressed to Joseph, implying that the writer planned to return later and suggesting a private encounter. The complaint alleges that Joseph feared the unidentified individual might come back to engage in sexual activity without his consent. Alarmed, he contacted hotel security and notified representatives connected to Will and the tour. He documented the scene by taking photographs of the items and requested to be moved to a different room for safety reasons. Joseph also contacted the local police department through a non-emergency line to formally report the incident. Hotel security later told Joseph there were no signs of forced entry. According to the lawsuit, security staff stated that the only people who should have had access to his room were members of the management team responsible for booking accommodations. Rather than conducting a thorough investigation, the suit alleges that tour management dismissed Joseph's concerns and accused him of making up the incident. Shortly after reporting what had happened, Joseph was terminated from the tour. The lawsuit states that he was told the production was moving in a different direction. However, Joseph claims this explanation was misleading, as another violinist was quickly hired to replace him. He believes the decision to fire him was retaliatory and directly connected to his report of the hotel room intrusion. The complaint further alleges that Will was involved in the decision to terminate Joseph's employment. It also claims Joseph had been deliberately groomed and psychologically primed for further sexual exploitation, though it does not detail specific acts beyond the alleged pattern of behavior and the Las Vegas incident. As a result of the termination and the events surrounding it, Joseph claims he suffered severe emotional distress, symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, and significant financial losses due to the sudden end of his employment and damage to his career. Will Smith's legal team has strongly denied the allegations. His attorney stated that the claims made against Will are false, baseless, and reckless, and that they are categorically denied. The attorney added that all available legal options would be pursued to address the lawsuit and bring the truth to light. Representatives for Will and an individual associated with Treyball Studios management have been contacted for comment, but no additional statements have been released publicly. In the days following the filing of the lawsuit, Joseph shared a video message on Instagram that appeared to reference the situation without naming Will directly. In the video, Joseph explained that earlier in the year he had been hired to perform on a major tour with a highly influential figure in the entertainment industry, describing how proud and excited he was for the opportunity.
With somebody who is huge in the industry. So I was excited, proud of myself for getting the opportunity.
He said that serious issues arose during the tour, but that he could not discuss specific details due to the ongoing legal case. Will Smith has continued to strongly reject the accusations brought against him, stating that he intends to aggressively defend himself and pursue every legal avenue available to establish the facts. Is there any real path to redemption for Will Smith? Or will the Oscar night incident forever define his legacy in Hollywood? The bigger question is, can time alone erase such a public moment from the industry's collective memory? Will he continue to face lasting repercussions for a single, impulsive decision made on the world's biggest stage? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.